Recovery Ecosystem Podcast is an initiative of Detroit Recovery Project, Incorporated. Our mission is to support sustained recovery, health, and wellness.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Recovery Ecosystem Podcast. So happy to have you here with us today, and I want to introduce none other CEO of the Detroit Recovery Project and author of this amazing work, the Recovery Ecosystem, none other than Dr. Andre Johnson.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Robert. I want to take a moment and just say we're happy to be here today. This is our second day of doing this taping for our podcast to really promote the recovery ecosystem, a holistic approach to recovery. And I'm happy to introduce our co-host. Her name is... well, let me just let you all know, we got the brightest on this show. She's currently a doctoral student at Oxford University out of the UK area. She's a wife, loving wife to her husband, and she's a researcher and author. She's published many articles in the space of substance use disorders. And she works for a national foundation based out of California and Washington, D.C. So for me, it's an honor to have, and she was just featured in the under 30 was it the Macomb County area?
It was for the Arab America Foundation.
The Arab American Foundation. She had shared that with me earlier this week, which I'm just so proud and elated just to have a younger woman that really immersed herself into the space. But without further ado, I want to introduce Layal Bu Harfouch. That name puts me to work, but I'm happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. This is amazing. I'm so happy to be here and working with you, and you've been a great mentor so far in this space. It's been amazing. So thank you. And happy to be here as well, but I also have the extreme honor of introducing our guest speaker, Mr. Andrew Brown out of Care of Southeastern Michigan. He's the communications director. He's also a person in long-term recovery. He's been 17 years in recovery, absolutely amazing. And he's also a peer recovery coach and experienced trainer. So thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Layal. Thanks, Andre, for having me. Really honored to be here.
Yeah, and we're equally honored to have you here, and we're just going to jump right into it. Today's focus is rewiring the mind, retraining thought patterns in recovery, and why that's important. I often hear people say things like, "You need your brain washed," but it's important that we really have this conversation around how our brains are wired. We were talking to Andrew earlier about the comic Mark London. He always says, what does he used to say? First thought wrong.
Yeah.
First thought wrong.
That is Mark's name.
But a lot of it is how we're wired. So when we have experiences in life, or we see things, we feel things, our responses are based on how we're wired. And I'm wondering, as a person who's been in sobriety for 17 plus years, how does that bode with you?
It evolves. It evolves. It's, the rewiring early on that I had to go through was a lot different than what I do today, and early on, I think it was a real lack of self-acceptance. There's that pink informational pamphlet from one of the fellowships out there called Self-Acceptance. And I found recovery this last time in a correctional facility.
Okay.
And carried that IP with me everywhere. And the reason was I just had very little of it. And I think starting to think about rewiring my brain like the basis when I was looking over the materials for today. That just stuck out, that total lack of self-acceptance early on.
Where do you think that lack of self-acceptance. When did it start, if you had to go back?
I'll go way back. I mean, my story starts with a trauma like many others. I lost my mother at the age of 14 to terminal cancer, and shortly after that, my use started. So I could go way back to that point.
Okay.
Of a lot of it starting because the person I sought acceptance and validation from was no longer there, and again that changed after I started using. And
Yeah, sure. I couldn't only imagine that your life had changed significantly after losing moms, and that can be a traumatic experience in itself. And did you have any siblings?
yes, I have a brother and a sister. I'm kind of a surprise baby though, so they're a little older than me.
So you're the baby. You're the baby.
Yeah, and my brother is also he'll have 19 years this year, so my brother's also in long-term recovery. So
Great.
we weathered some storms, man.
Yeah. Sorry to hear about that. And it's so much you can unpack there.
Yeah.
As a psychologist, we're trained to really look at the trauma, and especially when it happens in early childhood, and how trauma exposure during early childhood can cause individuals to develop certain patterns, and those patterns and those behaviors are often not always healthy patterns and behaviors, especially after losing somebody significant.
Right. Isn't those trying to figure out ACEs, correct?
Yeah,
ACEs.
that's one. Yeah, that's a very correct. ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, is a tool that we use to assess if a child have in fact experienced trauma, and based on the scores, and I think the scores can range from like 0 to 10, and if you score like a 3 or a 4, then it means you have definitely experienced some type of traumatic experience as a child. And usually what happens is when that happens and the child has not been helped, then it begins to morph into or manifest itself into other areas, whether it's smoking tobacco, whether it's drinking alcohol or smoking marijuana, or perhaps some other maladaptive type behaviors usually occur. And that's when we want to just kind of, take a deep dive and see where people are.
I got a question. Andrew, you said, I know you said something with your chest stuck out. He was like, I was a surprise baby. And that lets me know you kind of knew it and felt it. Did that contribute to your trauma? Just, I guess you felt like you weren't playing and can you expound on that a little bit? You was like, you was a surprise baby.
Yeah, I was. My father was 41 when he had me, and my brother was 13 years older. Sister was 5 years older. They just weren't expecting me, and I just remember seeing pictures of like videos of my dad. And I mean, I know he loves me, but I just remember seeing videos of him carrying me around at 41. And he was like, what did I do? What did I do? So I maybe at some
you internalize it.
I think
they probably didn't verbalize it, but you felt like,
sure.
Wow, am I even wanted here? Like
at some level, yeah. And I think just having that age gap, till I got a little bit older to really connect. I just didn't have those close age siblings. I guess was
Yeah, you believe that contributed to your trauma? You think?
Yeah, maybe to some extent. Like I said, I know I was loved, but my dad was my parents were a little more wore out by the time they had me. I feel so.
Right.
And I was a high energy guy, so.
Well, another thing that I was thinking about is, as I got older and more well-read on these types of things, trauma can affect you biologically, like physiology. Your physiology is all, because your body is so used to being in that state of high, intense stress, right? Like, it becomes your regular. Just like how we have habits, like even outside of substance use disorder, where it becomes your regular, right? And how do you work out of that when it's a trauma, right? That's something else you need to address. So I don't know, Dr. Johnson, can you speak more to that about like, traumas and how that's going to be different than just like if I want to break my bad habit of like, something, just like
Yeah.
grabbing my phone when I wake up in the morning and doing other things that aren't necessarily the best decision for me,
Good point. I mean, it's so much to unpack, as, I'm sitting here, I want to unpack everything with each and every one of you all, because every time you talk, I'm listening and I'm getting like all types of activities around questions. But what happens is with trauma, people develop certain coping styles to cope with their trauma. And it really depends on, some people can go to the gym and work out. Some people can find some pills, or find some alcohol, or find some sexual activities, or find some shopping, or something outside of the individual. And so that's why I want to just go dial it back a little bit and talk about the ecosystem, because we're looking at looking at our internal narrative in terms of what's been said to us, what's been told to us. So Andrew's already said, "I was a surprise baby." That was an internal. That was an
a
internal
mistake almost.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily want to say that unless he says it.
Okay.
But what I will say is that's part of his internal narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And our internal narratives are often what influence our behaviors, what influence our thoughts. And sometimes it has an impact on our emotions and how we move. Now, that's a lot to unpack, but we want to make sure that we don't predict individuals' narratives. We want individuals to talk about their narratives in an open space, because, again, when we have these internal narratives and we don't have that safe space to discuss it and receive constructive support and criticism, it permeates on the inside. And we walk around with this stuff for years and years.
That's such an important point. That's such an important point, because, especially, I'm not a person in recovery, but being in the clinical space for a while and then being in policy and, hearing people's stories, they often talk about times when they've been told what their internal narrative is, from somebody else, right? You must have just jumped into pills right away. You didn't even, you didn't assess, what's the best solution for you. And, because, you have a moral failing here, and that's not the case for everybody, right? So I think that's a super important point about internal narratives are internal. You can't tell somebody what they've done and why, right? So on the broader scale of how people look at use disorders,
Yeah.
What do you all think has been instrumental in shifting your internal narratives? What would you say, Andrew?
I think Wael just kind of spoke to it was, when people treated me as a resource, instead of, I think stigma permeates still. It's gotten better, but I think dialing it forward to when I was trying to receive help for my substance use disorder, many times that narrative was kind of already walking through the door. People saw me, had these feelings about me or feelings about people who use substances, and made assumptions until really someone treated me as a resource and wanted to hear my experience, kind of like you just alluded to, Dr. Johnson, too. I don't think change, I don't think I wanted to change. I don't think until someone opened those doors and showed me. And, I can remember, ask me all the times people treated me bad. I can probably remember them, when seeking help. But the times I really remember is when people treated me as a resource and asked me to tell my story, rather than just predict that, he uses needles, he shoots drugs, he's, this and that, and permeating that stigma. And rather than, this guy needs some help, let's listen to him. If that makes any sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I know for me, what I've done is, and you talk about it in your book a little, is creating this ecosystem. And I do that by cultivating self-awareness. Because what I found out, a lot of things that was going, traumas I was having, I really identify with Andrew. I was having traumas, but I didn't even know. I didn't have enough enough self-awareness to even know them, because, my father wasn't even in my life I don't think I saw my father regularly till I was almost 30 years old. And but I can never remember having those thoughts about, oh, I wish I had a dad. But I probably was experiencing that trauma and didn't even really realize it. I think in later years I realized, like, wow, it probably would have been different if I had a father. But I do remember being raised by my stepfather and feeling like this outsider, especially I think after him and my mother, they had a child together. But I don't think it was a conscious, like I woke up like, oh, I can't stand these. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't like that, but it was, I think you said internalized. I think the discomfort I had is I felt like like I'm not, you know what I'm saying? It was like something wasn't right, like, and I don't think this man really liked me like that. This supposed caretaker, but I don't think he really messed with me like that, but it wasn't something I was conscious of because, you just go on and you live in life and you go into school. But if I could reflect on it, I'm aware enough to realize a lot of that was traumatic and it led to a lot of decisions I made, That was an ecosystem. It was just a negative one, though.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the conversation and thank you for sharing that, Robert. Your personal experiences is so important, and it's important that we examine our ecosystem and how our ecosystem helped us to, or attribute it to our thinking, our thought patterns. And that's one of the things that I think as people dive deeper when they have substance use disorder, challenges is really looking at who influenced you. And was it your environment? Was it your family? Was it your community? Was it your peers or whomever? And then we got to look at it and see were these where are the positive influences and where are the negative influences? And how do we begin to shift? So like for me, when I entered recovery as an 18-year-old young man, I had to dial it back and start changing music. I remember being introduced to jazz music as a young man and developing an appreciation for listening to Michael Franks and Hiroshima. And it started changing, versus listening to NWA. And not to say it's a bad thing, but at least a process of learning to calm my mind. Because there is something called mindfulness that requires breathing techniques. It requires being able to sit still, being able to be present, and pull back from the outside world. And I think when we're talking about retraining one's thought process, ultimately we want to help people to rewire their brain and give them the skills they need to rewire their brain, because we have to break those automatic thoughts. We have to challenge those internal narratives, and we have to make peace with our past. And so often our past involves not having our biological father or mother in our lives, and that brings what? Grief. It brings loss. It brings so much can come up depending upon the individual. And often those things come up and they're never dealt with. It's just a lid, just putting a lid on a pressure cooking pot that's just constantly bubbling. And so we have to, really take a deeper dive and look at our experience and how they've influenced us and develop new habits and new behaviors.
Yeah, I tell my students all the time, I say, hey, give me that phone, because I know all you do is listen to probably that negative rap and people arguing on social media all day. That's what gets the most traffic on social media, is this divisive content, and like, because they call it like rage bait. I'm sure everybody heard that term. And like, it's nothing like being addicted to some good old rage bait. But I said, hey, give me that phone. Download like a positive app that at least at points in the day, give yourself a balance. Don't just have, all negative intake all day. I'll take their phone right from them. But you made some good points about what we, like you were saying about us internalizing this negativity from our environment. But it's about narratives like this and conversations like this help us see things that we just couldn't see about ourselves. And, I know that's probably why I started getting high. I probably just had a lot of trauma. I didn't even realize. I didn't even know what is it called? The nuclear family, that, what that was like or what that was supposed to be. And when you didn't have that, things you experience as a result, a lot of stuff you just don't even know. You just, like you said, just going along, crashing about in life, and I'm here now and this is what we do. And so, yeah, you brought up a lot of good points.
Well, the another point that as I heard you speaking, it kind of brought to mind, I think people don't know a lot about also just therapy in general, right? Therapy is a very negative thing. People think you need to be like crashing, just completely done for to even go to therapy. And that's not the case, right? So we have a clinical psychologist with us. I think it would be wonderful to go into maybe some just aspects of therapy, practical strategies about how you even get started. I think for one, changing the narrative about therapy, I think to begin with, because a lot of people are just, they're just for some reason not with it. They think it's, something that it's completely not. So love to hear your perspective on that.
Absolutely. I mean, we live in this society where people are not really forthcoming. People are guarded, and people have been in communities and home environments where therapy can be frowned upon or perceived as being a weak person to have to go talk to somebody about what's going on with you. So it's a lot of negative and a lot of stigmatization. And I think some of those things are what generally happens when kids and we grow up in these environments that, because what happens is we develop these type of, I don't know if you are familiar with like attachment theories. There's multiple attachment theories. They have one called secure attachment. Another one is called anxious attachment. There's
Avoidant attachment, I think, too.
Avoidant attachment and ambivalent. There's 4 different types of attachment. And what happens is your attachment style is developed based on your early childhood experience with grief and loss. Yeah. And so when you don't make that peace with your internal self, you begin to develop these patterns that often, in some cases, they come out in the relationships that we have with others, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so, it can be a significant other, it can be a child, it can be a sibling or whomever. And those relationships, in some cases, can be unhealthy or dysfunctional based on, if you have an insecure attachment. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have a secure attachment, then that is different. But when you have a anxious attachment, you have this anxiousness all the time. And you're always kind of predicting something to go wrong versus something to go right. And so all these things are like, just natural patterns and behaviors that's developed. And so that's why in the book, I wanted to focus on helping people to really, look at their thoughts and constantly asking yourself, how did you come up with this? How did you conclude this is your thoughts? Because is it really your thoughts, or is it the thoughts that's been influenced by somebody else who forced it upon you? Because some of this stuff is forced upon us. You got to remember, when moms and dad ain't around, somebody else have to step up. And if that person is not bringing that nurture and that love, and not to knock anybody who's there, but in some cases, people can't bring you what they don't have. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I think I experienced that like in my adult relationships. I mean, like I love my mom with all my heart. And if you ever hear this podcast, I see my mother get married and divorced like 5 or 6 times. So when I can see myself in relationships like if it ain't working, you walk away. I never seen nobody like hang in there and go through the ups and the downs. It was like, oh, this ain't working this month. See, so and that's how I was being married multiple times. I want to ask our guests though. Because we're talking about incorporating this positivity into our life as a result of the trauma we had, our drug addiction. We know after the drugs and alcohol are gone, it's still trauma that led us to that. So what's like part of your process to try to stay positive and stay up? Are you like a part of the 12-step community, or is it like something you do daily? Is it a daily regimen to kind of keep yourself, up high and from not making bad decisions?
Yeah, thanks, Rob, and that, like I said earlier, that's kind of evolved over time. Early on, it was really, getting out of jail. It was really about connection to 12-step groups, mutual aid groups, and
so you went to jail.
Yeah, yep. I found recovery this past time in jail, and we all kind of talked about therapy. And that hesitancy. And when I got out of jail this last time, I was connected with outpatient therapy. And this was 2007, 2008. So we're talking before Medicaid expansion and all that. Substance use disorder help wasn't as accessible. But I got connected with a therapist just to graduated from Wayne State, LLMSW. And I'm like, this girl's not going to help me. And, just went into it with a negative thought and kind of like you talked about Dr. Johnson, just really had a negativity towards therapy, I think, and, just based on growing up, in my household. But getting connected with that therapist was the best thing ever happened. And I think the thing was like, she was honest, she was transparent. She wasn't telling me something she wasn't. Like she wasn't saying I'm someone in recovery, you got to listen to me. So instead of me immediately being closed-minded to her, I practiced some open-mindedness, and she was the best therapist I had ever worked with. And then, like you're saying, what did I kind of surround myself with? The mutual aid groups there, a lot of it out of fear. Not fear so much of dying, not fear so much of being incarcerated again. But fear after being clean a little while in jail, almost 6 months. I had a fear of letting my family down. And, I did some rotten stuff to my family, in my youth, so that was what I was most scared of. But that kind of pushed me to finally seek some help. And over the years, Rob, like you said, I think, and maybe Dr. Johnson can talk about this a little more, and you too, Rob, but like, I think a lot of professionals in this field probably need therapy, but there's some hesitancy there in the community, to get therapy. And I feel it sometimes. It's like, I've been clean 17 years. I've been working in this field a long time. Like, I don't really need to reach out and talk to people. But, there's some stuff I do on a daily basis, but I'm not scared to ask for help today. And a lot of it, like you said, mindfulness, prayer, taking that deliberate time without social media, without music, with just sometimes listening to music without lyrics is a huge thing to take me out of that.
I got a question, and the question is to kind of, it's about getting rid of the stigma. Now, you don't have to get too personal, but what types of things do you talk about in therapy? Like when you talk with your therapist, I don't want you to get too personal, but because like you said, we have to like get rid of the stigma of therapy. And like, what types of things do you talk about when you talk with a therapist?
And I think, like I said, I probably don't see a therapist as much as I should, but I work with a ton of social workers, and the organization I work for, even though I'm in communications right now, I still work with a lot of our coaches and a lot of the trauma that happens to the people we serve. So I'm really grateful we have like compassion fatigue groups. We have, confidential groups that employees can access. And when needed, man, I just have to talk about, what I'm going through, the feelings I have. And as much as like, and working in this field for a while, as much as I want to say like we get used to losing people around us, I don't think we really do. And I think I shouldn't speak for anyone else, but I know for myself, like when I don't process that, and I heard a therapist talking the other day, like even if it's someone we've met one time or, maybe they were in the parking lot here and you chatted with them for a minute and then you hear they passed, stuff like that. I really need to process loss as it happens. And even if, like I said, I just have to be vulnerable. And
what's compassion fatigue? I heard you say that.
So compassion fatigue is just like, I think working in this field for a while, whether you're a peer, I don't think peers get enough credit, but whether you're a peer, a therapist, a case manager, at times, you can see someone accessing treatment 6-7 times and you're like, dang, man, hold the bed for someone else. This guy's been here 20 times. And that can happen naturally. So I think like we saw a need to really address that, and talk through some of that. And even though we feel that, we know that, we need an outlet for that because it's real. And if you don't, work on compassion fatigue, you're going to feel a lack of compassion with the people you're working with. And that's one thing we've really tried to avoid and make available. We even bring in like a third party therapist, so they feel comfortable. It's not it's not someone from the agency that's going to, and that's really been helpful, especially for our peer staff, because they deal with a lot of frontline trauma. And, I don't think there's always that spot for processing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. In fact, I was in a conference call last week with a lady out of Chicago who represents a national organization that travels and develops recovery-friendly workplaces. And those are some of the examples of what she talked about, to have a recovery-friendly workplace for employees who work in these environments that need to support. And how do we develop these ecosystems? And it sounds like you've done a really good job describing your ecosystem, answering Robert's question. And thank you for being open and honest and sharing that personal side of your life with us, Andrew. I think it's important that we can continue to, just have these spaces to have these conversations, because this is not the most popular conversation to have in America. And we still are, even in this 21st century, the pink elephant in the living room is still addiction. And it's not the thing people talk about. And that's why we wanted to create this space to really have these conversations on this podcast and have fruitful conversations that involves experiences, personal experiences, and be okay and be comfortable with it. Because, early on, we didn't have no type of venues for this kind of conversation. 20 years ago when I started working in the field, well, shall I say 30 years, 35 plus years. But, we have to all understand there is an inner critic that has to be challenged, and that inner critic often says things like, I'll never change, I don't deserve better. That becomes the narrative, and that narrative turns into behavior. Or begin to have these cognitive distortions of all or nothing. And so when people make statements like, you always do that, that's part of their cognitive distortion, and that's how they think. That's the automatic thought, and they genuinely believe that. And so that has to be countered. Or again, how trauma and addiction can reinforce each other in terms of the thought loops, because what we're thinking are considered loops. It's a constant musical theme that says, I ain't shit, or you ain't shit. And the more that loop continues to play out, the more it can start transforming in your behavior. And so now it's all about training or retraining your mind to really look at the toxic positivity or negativity, and or how it impacts one's emotional recovery. Because emotional recovery is really looking at our emotional IQ. And some of us don't have that emotional IQ. And in order to have a healthy emotional IQ, we have to have healthy thoughts. We have to have healthy boundaries. And that's how we begin to get better. And when we have a healthy IQ, we can then begin to develop some type of empathy for others, and empathy and grace for ourselves. And then ultimately, if we're not able to do that kind of stuff, we may have to take a deeper dive and seek out a therapist that can process therapists that have experience with cognitive behavioral therapy, because cognitive behavioral therapy is a modality. It's also considered one of the gold standards for therapeutic treatment. If you can help change a person's mind, then you can help change their behavior. But some people have these fixed ideals that it's impossible to change. It's impossible to get better, and y'all can't help me. That's the other thing about therapy.
Yeah, I think you also mentioned a really important point about therapy is that a lot of people think it's going to be like that toxic positivity point you pointed out, right? And like, oh, I'm just going to go and she's going to pretend everything is all, sunshine and rainbows over here when it's not, right? Like it's either all or nothing. And so I think a good reframing might be that it's emotional recovery, and like people, no matter what you're going through, to have that extra time to pour into yourself is something so special. Imagine our day to day. I know I'm on the run 24/7, and it's like I need that time to just say, okay, what is going on, right? We go day to day. I don't think, the people even remember what they ate yesterday, right? That reflection piece, I think, is something we don't talk about enough, that it's okay to pause, especially now. I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but I feel like there's a really toxic grind culture that keeps you going and going and going, and doesn't allow you to just pause. There's a frown upon pausing, right?
Yeah.
And how are you supposed to rewire those things rewire your brain, rewire your thought processes, your habits without pausing?
Yeah. In Dr. Johnson's book, and I want both of you guys to talk about it a little bit. He talks about reframing, because I heard you say that. And I think that's a good practice to rewire when you reframe. And I play this with my students all the time. I say, okay, tell me a situation, we're going to reframe it, And so like most of the time they're like, no, all of this is just crap. We can't do nothing about it. And I say, okay, I'll give you mine. You remember the other day, I said, man, I was coming off 8 Mile. Bam, ran over a pothole. Bam, car started leaning to the right. Oh, God, I got a flat. All right, Dr. Johnson book say we can reframe. How do we reframe? How can I say something positive? So I'm sitting on the side of the road and I say, you know what? Now I don't have to complain about all of this money I spend on insurance. Because I have good insurance, I can just dial the people. They're going to come out, fix it, and I'm going to go on about my day. Now, a quick caveat. Dr. Johnson had talked to me while I was sitting on the side of the road. He did wake me up, because I was a little like pissed at first. And he was like, you said one of those recovery terms. I don't know what you said, but it woke me up and it allowed me to reframe, And that's what we got to do. That's one of the practices that it talks about in the book, reframe, because you really could look at anything and say, I mean, even at the worst, at least I got my health, or at least I got good insurance, or, at least I got a job that I'm going to, or, you know what I'm saying? It's always a reframe. So I just practice it, all day, Matter of fact, I went around the room with my students, and some stuff, it was hard, but I kept trying, like that. Oh, we got kicked out of our house. Well, at least you got your health and you got your legs to move your stuff to the next place. Reframing. Talk about reframing in your book. It's one of my favorite.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I agree. I think it's key and instrumental in progressing when going through challenges. Because again, when you have these negative thoughts, they can turn into negative emotions and feelings of, I'm having a stressful day, and you very well can have a stressful day, but your entire day don't need to be stressful. You can have some peaceful thoughts. I mean, I have learned to sit still and enjoy watching birds. Watching birds just do. I've enjoyed watching squirrels. Squirrels playing in the yard. Little bitty things can be some small ways of reframing our thought process, and really. And I would also add that, sometimes writing a gratitude list. Write down 3 things that you're grateful for every day, and build from there. But before we wrap up this portion, I want to say, Andrew, did you have any last words for the audience as it relates to why reframing your thoughts are important?
No, I think Rob, made a great point there too, and I'm constantly reminded of those reminders. And I think the biggest thing for me with reframing is just not falling into that self-pity pit. Okay. Because self-pity is, it's true. It's the most draining of all things. And it'd be really easy for Rob the other day to sit on the side of the road and not call you, to, get some words there, and just be, poor me, my car, this and that. But you step back, you take a look at it. Hey, seeing the positives. I got good insurance. I think it's the same thing for me. I just, I get down, I get frustrated. I get in that spot where, I don't want to reach out, but, I know that greater things are here. I know that, my higher powers kept me here for a reason. And I know that, if I can look at the big picture, like you said, just a short, not even a full gratitude list, just a few, 3-4 things I'm grateful for, that never fails, and that's the same thing I tell people I've worked with, pro con list, putting some stuff down on paper, and, helps me get out of it. But no, I'm very honored to be here, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you for being our guest and being so honest, open, and willing. We really appreciate you having you here, Andrew. And we'll definitely be in touch. And I certainly agree with you, man. I think that's the key. And you use the word self-pity. People often experience self-pity and get on the pity pot when things are not working, or when we have challenges like getting a flat. Those things can just morph into just a horrible day or a horrible situation, because sometimes you can say some things to the wrong person, and that can result in some altercation, whether it's verbal or physical, or you can do something that you regret out of haste. And so I think just really being patient and being grounded as best as we can, the better outcome we'll have with challenges and situations. You know what I mean?
The Recovery Ecosystem Podcast is produced by Detroit Recovery Project, Incorporated. If you or someone you know needs support for substance use or mental health, call 313-365-3100 or visit recoveryfordetroit.com. You are not alone.